Dio sat in judgment on his mother's high stool, while the herdsman laid down his burden before the dais. It was early morning when his mother's servants had woken him and informed him that he had visitors. The slave women had bathed him, then rubbed his dark brown skin with scented oils and shea butter to make him look every inch the farmer he was never meant to be. His kaftan was a sapphire blue. He wore it with a pair of white loose-fitting linen pants. He wore a white kufi as well, to signify that he was the head of the household, though that was only true while his mother and elder sister were away. The old man before him was the third and last of the men who had come to the palace seeking an audience. Dio had tried his best to listen to all of their grievances, as his teacher had advised him. He was attentive at first, even a bit excited. That ended when the men began to talk. They had only come to complain about some sickness that had killed a few of their cattle. Dio had hoped for news of something more interesting, like bandits or raiders from the Southlands, a foe that he could test his skill against. He glanced to the left of him, where his eyes fixed on the scenes carved into the walls that surrounded the courtyard. The courtyard was a large one, large enough for 2 warriors to spar on horseback with spear and javelin. If his family were an older one, the walls would be filled with scenes of their great achievements. As it was now, only half of the left wall was carved, and only with the great deeds of his mother and sister. Dio was 11, almost a man, and he had been training with sword and bow since he was 8. He was more than ready to fight in battle like his older brother had. A hand swatted him on the back. He began to slouch. He realized and straightened himself. Then he looked to his right, where Kofi stood behind him. Kofi spared him a disapproving glance, then turned his eyes back to the herdsman. Dio did the same. The herdsman, who knelt in the brown dust of the inner courtyard, had been speaking for some time, it seemed, and though Dio did not understand his tongue, the tears that wet the old man's cheeks were enough to make his plea understood. The object the herdsman had placed on the ground before him was roughly the size of a loaf of bread and was wrapped in a grey cloth. The old man's body shook with each sob as he slowly peeled back the cloth. Dio was confused at first when the cloth had been removed and he saw what was there. "It is just a pair of rocks and some dried sticks," he thought. Then he looked closer, and as if on cue, the servants all gasped. Some of them recoiled in disgust. The old man began to wail, and Dio felt tears threaten his own eyes as well. What lay before him was the corpse of a babe. It was grey and shrunken, shriveled, like a dried date. An iron pendant wrought in the shape of the twin serpents hung from a leather cord around Dio's neck. He seized it. "What did this?" the boy heard himself ask. He was on his feet now, he realized, unconsciously, edging closer towards the grim sight. Kofi repeated his question to the man in his own language. Through tears and heart-wrenching sobs, the old herdsman replied. Kofi's lips drew to a hard line as the old man spoke. Then he turned to Dio. "He says the babe was healthy and strong when he put him to sleep. But the next morning..." Kofi went silent for a moment. "He believes it to be the work of an adze." The court erupted in question then. His mother's servants came from all across the empire and spoke a dozen different tongues. It all washed over him, but he heard none of it. Instead, he stared ever closer at the grey ruin before him. He couldn't have said what compelled him to do so. He watched as his flat nose collapsed inward and 3 flies crawled from the fissure, wet and slimy. That was too much. There was a foul taste in his mouth, first bitter, then sour. He retched. The tears were hot on his cheeks, a boy's tears. Dio whirled and ran. His kuvi went flying from his head as he leapt down from the dais. The sun was high in the sky before Dio could scrub the morning's failure from his mind. He hid in the only place he knew no one would find him. He was cradled in the branches of his family's ancestor tree. He had always felt safe there, as safe as if he were wrapped in his mother's own arms. Every noble house in the empire had an ancestor tree. Theirs was a mango tree. Having a fruit tree, as your ancestor tree, was supposed to be bad. He had heard once, though as he stuffed his face with the sweet flesh of a ripe mango, he could not imagine why. As he lay there on one of the thicker branches, he noticed a bird perched above him. "Have you always been there?" he wondered. The bird was black as a moonless night, with crimson eyes and a tail that split into two plumes as long as his arm. A swallowtail shriek, he thought. Above the gates of the palace, wrought in iron and bronze, the swallowtail shriek stood vigil as his family's standard. Kofi had told him that they were all extinct, and yet, there it was. "Did your family leave you all alone?" the boy asked. The bird gave no answer, but it seemed to stare at him expectantly. Dio stared back. Deep into those bright, bloody pools the bird had for eyes. And he saw. "Are you going to stay up there forever?" a voice called from below. It made him drop his mango. He turned to watch it fall and splatter on the small stone enclosure that ringed the mango tree. Kofi looked down at the mango, then up into the tree. "I hope that wasn't meant to hit me." You startled me." "Oh, good. So we won't have to fire your javelin, master," Kofi said with a smirk. The stone face he had worn this morning was a strange one. Smiles looked more natural on his face. "I want to be alone. Young master, as I have said many times, what a man wants and what he needs are rarely ever the same." Dio turned away from him. "I could live up here," he thought, with a shriek. "We could be close as brothers." He looked for the bird again, but it was gone. Would that I had wings as well. If he could change his shape, like some of the Empire's greatest warriors, he would become a bird and fly fast and far from here. But where would he go? He couldn't find an answer for that, so he decided to climb down from the branches. "Here he is," Kofi said once Dio stood in front of him. "I have words you need to hear." "Why do I need to hear of their problems if I cannot do anything to solve them?" Kofi put a hand on his shoulder. His hands were soft for a man, and he smelled of perfume and sandalwood like women do. It is good for a leader to hear what troubles his people, good for him and for them as well. "They are not my people," Dio said, slapping Kofi's hand from his shoulder. "They don't even speak the imperial tongue. They're just river folk." "Oh, and does that make them beneath you?" "I never said that." "You didn't have to," Kofi said as he walked past Dio to seat himself on the stone enclosure. The stone itself was old, much older than Dio's house. It was unmortared, and parts of it seemed to have crumbled and fallen away long ago. Yet what remained was still strong and firm. "Come sit here," Kofi said, patting the empty stone next to him. Reluctantly, Dio went and sat beside. "Your mother and sister have been summoned to serve as griots at the imperial court and may not return for years. Your brother may never return. Such is the life of a warrior. While they are gone, you are the farmer. Do you know what that means?" Dio made a face and crossed his arms. "Yes, I know what that means." It means that I'm to govern all the lands from the foothills to the Yamo River. I am to collect taxes and... Yes, yes, it means all of that, and more, Kofi said as he interrupted. But I did not ask what a farmer does. I asked if you know what it means. Dio shook his head sullenly, and Kofi smiled. It comes from an old tongue, the language of us riverfolk. Dio looked up in surprise at the mention of the word us, and that made Kofi's smile widen. To most of the empire, it simply means leader or head, but to us, southerners, it means father. Kofi reached out and patted him on the head. So, do you understand now, young master? You're more than just an appointed official. You may not share their blood, but so long as you presume to rule these lands, you share a bond. I think I understand, Dio said. Maybe, but something like that could take years for a man to truly understand. Dio cocked his head at that. Really, don't think too hard on it right now. Just see that you don't forget. Now why don't you head inside, get cleaned up and have something proper to eat? Dio stood and made to leave. Then he stopped and turned back to Kofi. What about the old man and whatever this sickness is, it is nothing natural, that much is plain. It may even be the work of a witch. That sent a chill through Dio. Tell me, young master, how would you deal with this issue? Dio thought for a moment, then decided. Send out a rider to Farinakan. Ask him to send us men to patrol the farms and villages. And ask for a fetish priest as well, or perhaps a sangoma. We may need one to fight the witch. Kofi smiled. My thoughts exactly. Now go on. It is ill for anyone to linger in the noonday sun. This is a time for devils. Dio did as he was told. He went back inside the main hall and had his slaves exchange his sapphire kaftan for plain white robes. He ate a meal of pepper soup and flatbread. Then he summoned Ifana to attend him in his apartments. She was the daughter of one of the slave women who tended to the horses. 5 years his senior with skin the color of a kola nut. And still everyone said that they could have been twins. He had called her to perform for him. She was no griot and didn't know anywhere near as many stories as his mother. Yet, she had a sweet voice, and she knew some stories that he doubted even his mother knew. What song would you like to hear today, young master? She asked. Ifana, you're of the river folk, correct? My mother is. Do you know any of their songs? I do. I would like to hear some. Tell me your favorite. She did as he asked. Ifana accompanied her words with the sounds of her balafon, which was a kind of wooden drum with 21 keys. The sound it made was light and high-pitched. If the flutter of a butterfly's wings or the sound of a child's laughter could be put to music, it would sound like a balafon. She played, and Dio found himself casted adrift. The words brought him back. She told the story of a brave warrior prince fighting a doomed struggle in the ruins of his kingdom. His name was Chinweki, and beneath the banyan tree he made his last stand. Beneath the banyan tree he met his foe, and beneath the banyan tree he breathed his last, his blood watering the earth. Perhaps the story should have frightened him, but Dio found it strangely peaceful. He was not aware when sleep took him, but he drifted and he dreamed. He was on his horse, with bow in hand, galloping across the sea, his brother and sister by his side. Ahead, half hidden in mist, a figure rode. The figure was clad in quilted armor, a lance of cold grey iron in his hand, the sapphire cloak on his back snapping in the wind. Though Dio could not see his face, and would not know it if he did, a part of him knew, perhaps the part that only exists in dreams, that this was his father. Dio spurred his horse on even harder, but the faster he rode, the further the figure went, until he was no more than mist on the horizon. His brother and sister had vanished from his side as well, and with them all the warmth in the world. His horse reared and screamed, just as the sea around him roiled and began to bubble and smoke. It was crimson now, he realized. He waded through a sea of blood. It was hot and sticky. It made his horse slow to a trot, and then a walk, until it could no longer move, and it was sunk down to its breast. The horse reared again, throwing him into the blood. Its taste was fire and copper and death. It made him want to retch. But when he opened his mouth, he felt a small shriveled hand grasp his tongue, and from his throat crawled the festering corpse of the thing that had once been a child. Then hands reached for him. Fingers dug into his flesh, pulled at him, seeking to bring him down. That was when he heard it. The fluttering of wings, and he opened one eye. The other was filled with blood. The shriek, with its night black feathers and eyes of blood. It landed on the corpse child and tore it apart with dagger-like talons. From the husk, 1,000 flies burst forth. The shriek's wings smothered them, and in those wings, those deep, dark wings, Dio saw all the colors of the cosmos. The boy woke, screaming. A hand grasped him, and that made him scream all the louder. Dio, Dio, it's me, it's Kofi. His eyes adjusted, and he saw Kofi's face in the shadows of his apartments. Young master, you need to get dressed. The riders I sent out have returned, and I fear their news is grim. In the dark of his apartment he dressed. No finery, a simple grey robe, while they were on their way out. Dio noticed something odd. Kofi was wearing a sword on his hip. They rushed out into the courtyard, where pure darkness greeted them. There was a hole in the sky, where the moon should have been. And despite the stars' best effort, shadows laid heavy on the land. One of the riders they had sent out had returned. He sat on an old wooden stool, and some of the other servants were around him, giving him water and tending to his wounds. The man bled from what seemed like 100 tiny wounds. In the dark, the blood that ran down his arms and chest and legs looked almost black. The young master is here. Tell him what you refused to tell us, Kofi said. The rider looked up, his eyes hollow and his cheeks gaunt. He seemed half a corpse to Dio. You don't. Cough. You don't understand it's his blood they want, not ours. There is no time for words. The man slipped a dagger from his waist and lunged at Dio. Dio watched the blade come at him, and for the flutter of a moth's wing, the dagger ran silvery with starlight. Kofi put a hand on Dio's chest and pushed him backwards. One moment, Kofi's hand was on the hilt of his sword. The next, his blade had split the rider's head in two. It was all over before Dio could have even taken a breath. If there are more enemies coming, then we need to get the young master to safety, Kofi was saying. That was when the scream came. It cut through the night air like a cold dagger in the belly. Kofi cursed, then shouted for everyone to get back inside the great hall. Ifana was the first one to see them. Her scream made Dio glance behind him. They came over the walls. He saw their hands first, clawing and scrambling to climb over. Then he saw their faces. Their eyes burned with a haunting amber light. Their mouths hung open in silent moans. They looked as if their skulls had been hollowed out and made into lanterns. Dio froze and a hand grabbed his. Ifanaz! She pulled him the rest of the way. Kofi was right behind him, his blade held firmly in hand. My bow, Dio thought. I need my bow. But he continued to run. They fled down the corridor, away from that horrid light and into the safety of the darkness. The servants around him were talking, trying to decide where to hide. In the granary, in the cellar, in the toilets on the second floor. Over them all, Dio heard a sound, the beating of wings. He broke free from Ifana's grip and ran ahead of the crowd. All of you follow me, he shouted, drowning out their voices. He ran through the darkness, following the sound of beating wings. Every now and again he would glance up and glimpse colors shining in the dark. He followed the wings until they led him outside to the ancestor tree. The shriek's black feathers drank the starlight as it soared into the upper branches of the tree. Dio knew then where they must go. He looked behind him to see who had followed. It was only Ifana and 2 other servants. Dio felt a sadness pass through him. To the tree, he said, pointing. They jumped to his command. One by one they climbed the tree. Dio was the last to go. When he made it to one of the lower branches, Kofi burst from the shadow of the corridor. He was bleeding from a wound on his head. Their eyes met briefly. Kofi smiled. Then he whirled to slash at a face in the dark. But more came on, an endless tide. They pushed him back into the yard, and more were coming over the walls. They seized him and ripped his sword from his hands. They grabbed at his arms and his feet, an arm wrapped around his throat. Dio's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought they might tear Kofi to pieces. Yet they did not. They held him and stood still, amber light burning in their dead lantern faces. Then the crowd parted, and Dio saw 1,000 amber eyes come to life in the corridor. A man stepped out. He wore an iron breastplate decorated with bells and charms. When he walked, the anklets around his feet jingled softly. Where the eyes of the others were like lanterns, his were molten pits of flame. His mouth did not hang open. Instead, when he saw Kofi, his lips peeled back into a snarl. Despite all of that, strangely to Dio, he seemed every bit a prince. The molten-eyed prince strode forward and grabbed Kofi by the throat. The flesh parted on the arm that held Kofi, and from the fissure poured a swarm of flies, all burning with amber light. They fell on Kofi, stinging and biting. When he screamed, they filled his mouth and killed the sound. They covered him like a blanket of flame. And when they fled, all that remained of him was a shriveled grey husk, which the prince tossed aside. Dio wanted to scream, but he made no sound. He wanted to cry, but his eyes were dry. Instead, he closed in on himself, going away to somewhere far inside. There was a sharp peck at his forehead, and wings beat at him. He wanted to swat at it, but he could not bring himself to harm the shriek. When he opened his eyes, though he did not remember closing them, there was not one bird, but 6. He glanced up deeper into the tree. He saw Ivana and the other servants were crying, holding tightly to branches, and he saw the dark shapes of 100 shrieks, all of them black as night with crimson eyes. I can smell the coward's blood in your veins. Come down and let me have a taste, the prince rasped. When he spoke, flames leapt from his tongue. Dio was not afraid. He could not be. He had a duty. He leapt down from his branch, followed by the beating of wings. The creatures had surrounded the ancestor tree, so he slammed into one as he landed. Before they could move to seize him as they did Kofi, the shrieks swooped in around him, a black tide that pushed the foe back. The creature beneath him still squirmed until one of the birds fell on it and drove its beak into its forehead. When the shriek pulled its beak free, it held a firefly therein, which it crushed and ate. The amber light in the creature's skull died then. Dio stood and his eyes met the prince's molten pair through a veil of black birds. If my blood were all it would take to save my people, then I would gladly give it. They are not your people, the prince snarled, a breath of flame leaping from his mouth. I was not speaking to you, demon, Dio said. Behind the prince was a shadow, short and stunted, made from 1,000 wriggling insects. The shadow clung to his leg. I wish to speak with the prince. I am Adza, and you will speak with me, the demon snarled. Dio did not respond. He simply waited. Eventually, the fire in the devil's eyes died down. Speak, the prince said. I'll say it again. If my blood will satisfy you, then take it and leave my people be. Dio said without a hint of the fear he felt. How can they be your people when they do not share your blood? Dio smiled. I have shared their songs and their stories. Those are stronger than blood. The prince's eyes weighed him. Then he moved forward. The shrieks could not hinder him. He took Dio's face in his hands, almost gently. Then his fingers dug into Dio's flesh and sent fire rushing through his veins. The flies were in him too, tearing flesh as they burrowed deeper and deeper. Through the agony, Dio could hear the prince's whispers. Our stories are your stories. Our rage, your rage. Then the world was black. His sleep was deep and dreamless, like floating on a midnight sea. When he woke, he was in his own bed and had been asleep for days. He had hoped it was a dream, a boy's hope, but Kofi did not visit him. It was Ifana that came to him and told him who they had lost. Her mother was amongst them. That angered him. A fire was inside now, the same as the prince, same as the fly that now crawled from beneath his fingernail. He had prayed for the wings, and the gods saw fit to answer him. Now all he need do was spread them and fly.